What's good? It's Woog. Dustin Poirier, 26-6 with one no contest versus Conor McGregor, 22-4. So damn, it's really happening. Former champ and crossover superstar, the electrifying Conor McGregor, returns. And it's not against a boxer or an aging cowboy. It's against former freaking title challenger Dustin Poirier, who's currently ranked number 2 contender, and that's without yet stripping the newly retired champ Khabib Nurmagomedov of his belt and from the rankings. You know, ever since that Mayweather-McGregor fight, I'd wondered whether Conor would ever return to form after receiving such a big payday. Like, how do you reshape your mindset back to the grind mentality that got you to where you are after having that type of success and exposure that Conor McGregor got within a 2 to 3 year span? This is what he did in a couple of years. He participated in the UFC's biggest pay-per-view ever in his rematch with Nate Diaz in 2016. The next year, Conor was involved in the second biggest pay-per-view event of all time in his boxing match versus Floyd. Then the next year, he was again involved in the biggest fight in UFC history versus Khabib. I mean, damn, you want to talk about reaching the highest of heights. I just didn't see, the fighting spirit not somewhat taking a hit after that type of fame and fortune. Marvelous Marvin Hagler, one of boxing's all-time greats, has this quote about it being difficult to get up early in the morning and train with the same vigor when you're now waking up in silk pajamas. Fighting is a hungry man's sport, and Conor is pretty well fed. And so a lot of the hate that you hear or see geared towards him, aside from his antics and his character and behavior and different things that people want to criticize fairly or unfairly, the truth is we just want to see him fight more. I mean, because he is so damn talented and exciting. And so when he's playing these different games and not fighting for long periods of time and then retiring and then unretiring, this whole thing is just frustrating because at the end of the day, people, whether they love him or they hate him, they want to see him fight. So the fact that he wants to jump in there with someone who's all business and is in his prime still in Dustin Poirier, that should be unbelievably exciting news for fight fans, especially after the frustrating 2020 where Conor had kicked it off, whooping up on Cowboy in January and had all these plans on how he wanted to handle 2020 before COVID hit. And then once COVID hit, Conor seemed to want to fight this guy and versus that guy, and Dana White and the company, they just weren't giving him what he wanted. Well, we're here now, so please don't let COVID cancel this one. So the subtext to this fight is that these two fought 6 years ago at featherweight 145 with Conor blasting Dustin in the striking game early and often. He finished Poirier in the first. The first meaning the first round of the first fight. But this all feels like ancient history now, doesn't it? Conor was ranked number 9 at the time. Dustin was ranked number 5. This was like UFC 178. Put it like this. Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson versus Chris Carriazo was the headliner. Even Cowboy Cerrone versus Eddie Alvarez was higher up on the fight card than Poirier versus McGregor won. So much has changed. Poirier has gone 10-2 since that fight with the one no contest versus Eddie Alvarez in their first fight. That's 10 wins since that loss to Conor. Not only that, but over time, Dustin's proven himself to be as durable as they come. Rewatch his all-out war versus Justin Gaethje in 2018. I kind of look at that and his 2 fights versus Eddie Alvarez as being the real rites of passage to becoming a great fighter instead of just a very good fighter for Dustin Poirier. His only loss in the past 4 years was to Khabib, and he faced a ton of adversity versus Dan Hooker, especially early before making adjustments and taking more control of the fight by the 3rd and 4th rounds. That fight, by the way, went the full 5. I never liked those stacking up on a fighter's record. It's a lot of brutality on the body. But in that Hooker fight, Poirier was coming off the loss to Khabib and was fighting a Dan Hooker who was carrying a ton of momentum into that one. Hooker had just won a close war versus Paul Felder, and just before that had arguably his best all-around performance versus former title challenger Al Iaquinta. Yeah, Hooker surprisingly dominated Iaquinta in that one. So Poirier versus Hooker was one of those, I don't know, type of fights where you really don't know who's coming out on top, especially with Dan Hooker's length and range and offensive arsenal. Hooker's with City Kickboxing. He's one of the disciples of that school of thought. He trains over there with champion Izzy Adesanya, champion Alexander Volkanovski, super trainer Eugene Behrman, and those guys. One of the best MMA breeding grounds in the world right now. So that's what Poirier was facing, and he digs deep and out dirty boxes Dan Hooker in a fight that had so much trench warfare. This was not a 5-rounder of the stick and move variety. This was a 2020 Fight of the Year contender. Another thing that you don't really want stacking up on your resume in terms of fighter longevity. So Dustin Poirier, in so many ways, is not the guy that entered the cage versus Conor McGregor in 2014. He has since stopped the likes of Justin Gaethje, Anthony Showtime Pettis, and Eddie Alvarez. So check it out. Since the start of 2017, Poirier has competed 8 times. In that same range, Conor has only competed 3 times. And one of those was the boxing match with Floyd, and another was the blink of an eye steamrolling of Cowboy Cerrone in the first round. In the first minute of the first round, where Conor somehow turned his shoulder into a murder weapon. I still have trouble wrapping my head around that performance. When I saw it, it looked like they clashed violently as Conor missed with the first punch of the fight. Conor almost ran up to Cowboy and launched into a deadly left-hand attempt that missed because Cowboy ducked, but as Cowboy ducked, he ducked right into Conor's thigh that I honestly think had the effect of a knockout punch or kick, or a near knockout punch or kick on Cowboy. So I think Cowboy's head was rocked. And I think he acknowledged this in an interview after the fight or on a social media post. But I thought Cowboy was rocked by a powerful, blunt object, and Conor spent the next 30 or so seconds just nailing him. Caught him with a high kick, numerous punches, fight's over. But the point being, Conor has fought less than 1 MMA round in the past 2 years. But the question I'm now stuck on is, who has the advantage in this case? Poirier, who's been in the trenches, sharpening his tools, but also taking beatings, or Conor, who I believe has been staying in shape, but hasn't remained in that all-in routine and cycle of having training camps to prepare for fights with any regularity. In this case, I think that it might actually favor the fresher Conor McGregor. I mean, Poirier has taken major strides career-wise and now has such a wealth of experience. I didn't even mention the 5-round decision win versus Max Holloway less than 2 years ago when Max tried to go up to 155 to compete there. But this all comes at a price. Believe it or not, Dustin Poirier is still only 31 years old. But I'm really looking at this like an old 31, wear and tear wise. Like if you look at Shogun Rua or Jose Aldo's career, look at them by the time they hit 31 and all the fights that they had, all the rounds that they had, all the long fights that they had. Not all 31s are the same. Put it like this, Conor's 32, but I look at him as being a much fresher 32 than Poirier's 31. Some fighters just age quicker, especially once they start fighting at the elite level and start competing in 5-rounders. And look, I'm not talking about age and wear and tear as in like Wanderlei Silva or some of the fighters where they get knocked out once and then it becomes so much easier to just knock them out again. Not that type of age. I'm just talking about the attrition and the toll that the body takes fighting these very difficult rounds. Conor McGregor might not be as sharp as he was 3 years ago, but I actually think that the trade-off in what he retains with his chin and with his body's overall health might outweigh Poirier's advantage in being the much busier fighter over the past 3 years. And I think McGregor is still on another level in his stand-up game compared with his contemporaries, the lightweights. Just the fact that He could even share a boxing ring with Floyd Mayweather for several rounds is proof of that. Let alone win a few rounds, whether you think Floyd was fighting his hardest or trained as hard or whatever. Conor is light speeds ahead of the competition in terms of his stand-up game, at least when he's at his best. And like I said, I think the Floyd fight, boxing match, proved that, if knocking out then champ Jose Aldo with the first power punch of the fight wasn't proof enough already. Please rewatch Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez when Conor became the champ at 155. Just the level of distance management and mastery and trickery, his feints. Like, you watch Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez, it actually looked a lot like Conor McGregor versus Poirier a few years prior to that. It's a similar type of domination where Conor first establishes a couple of things that get his opponent guessing. Then he's got that upright posture, wide stance. Like, Conor just has his whole construct together. I think that with all the strides that Poirier's made skills-wise, mentally, experientially, that once they're back in the cage, him and Conor, that there will be aspects of McGregor's stand-up game and his mental game, his movement, again, his posture, his unorthodox fighting stance, not only him literally being a southpaw, which is literally unorthodox, but in how he bends at the knees and often has this wide stance where he's playing these hand games and his intimidation tactics and his random and unpredictable high kicks, spin kicks, just to throw the opponent off, which I don't think that the intimidation tactics will be as overt as when these guys were much younger a few years ago, where there was so much smack talk and they're both acting like juvenile delinquents. They're a lot older now. They're in their early 30s, so I don't think that the intimidation tactics will be the same. But sometimes, even with his silence, Conor is doing certain things where he's just carrying himself in a way where there's a level of certainty that has to play into the minds of his opponents, especially when they're less experienced, as was the case several years ago. Poirier, I think, is more grounded, more solid in his own stature, to where it might not have the same effect, but I can't say that it won't have any. I think that all of these subtle Conor McGregor idiosyncrasies will start looking familiar, and that the first few minutes of the fight might be enough for Conor to, if not finish the fight altogether, to establish himself as the one who can end the fight in any exchange. I just don't think that, as improved as he is, that the same Dustin Poirier who fought in those battles of attrition versus Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, even Dan Hooker, would be enough to beat Conor. Basically because in all of those fights, except for the Holloway one, Poirier got hit very flush in the first and second rounds, and hit pretty often. And Conor McGregor really needs to just be right only a couple of times, to where, again, if he doesn't finish Poirier early, he'll certainly make Dustin gun-shy. And this, in my opinion, is whether or not the psychology of the first fight even plays into this fight. There are just things that McGregor does to inflict maximum damage in the first round, and Poirier isn't Khabib, to where there's this perpetual threat of a takedown which consumes his opponent's every move and thought. So if a boxing or kickboxing match breaks out here, which I assume it will, given both guys' fight-by-fight histories, I still have to say that Conor's special stand-up abilities should put Poirier in all types of danger, especially early. So then the next question, what happens if Dustin Poirier weathers a storm and is able to survive to the end of the second round? Does this fight then turn into a Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 2 dogfight? And if it does, can Conor's cardio here versus Poirier match his cardio in that 5-round Nate Diaz rematch? Again, I just think that whether this goes 1 round, 2, 3, or 5, that minute for minute, McGregor should get the better of most of these exchanges. And if either guy's leg is going to buckle from any particular strike or from an accumulation of strikes at any point, that it's still going to be Dustin's, even as good as he's become. This one started off feeling tough to analyze, especially given the surprise in Conor simply selecting Poirier as his next opponent. Again, Poirier isn't the sexy super fight type of name that Mayweather, Pacquiao, Khabib, Nate Diaz, or even Jorge Masvidal is. Poirier is about as much a time to get back to work choice of opponent as you could find. I love it. But the more analytical this process became, the more it became kind of clear to me that Conor's advantages then are still largely advantages that he possesses today. And unless his abilities have suddenly fallen off a cliff, which I don't think that blink of an eye performance versus Cowboy is any evidence of that, Conor is still the much sharper, more elusive, more precise, powerful, sophisticated, and deadlier striker between the two. Poirier's only chance here, in my opinion, is getting Conor to totally gas out and exhaust, which is possible, but I think that McGregor narrative is kind of blown out of proportion. I mean, he did go a full 5 rounds versus Nate Diaz up at 170. Yes, it was over 4 years ago, but Conor's a pro. I think that he knows what he's in for and that he needs to prepare accordingly. So I'm going Conor McGregor here, and I'm going Conor via knockout or stoppage. Even hearing myself say this out loud feels kind of wild because of how good I know Dustin Poirier's gotten over the years. Again, rewatch that classic between him and Justin Gaethje from 2018. Also, I have to say this, Dustin Poirier's walkout music is one of the best. He enters the cage to none other than James Brown's The Boss. Wow. A song, by the way, that was sampled for Nas's track 1, Get Down, from his 2002 album Godson. Great taste, Dustin. But then again, Conor McGregor refers to himself as the Notorious, which, I mean, you can't front on that. But let me know your thoughts on this very exciting bout, which I wouldn't be surprised if at some point the UFC announces that this fight is for the vacant lightweight title. Khabib just defended his title, so maybe that's why they're waiting before they strip him, even though he said he's retiring. I could understand them giving him at least a regular fight cycle, clear his head, like several months to schedule maybe his next fight, and then strip him if nothing happens and if he still doesn't want to fight anymore. But as it stands, Poirier versus McGregor is not for the title. It's not even for an interim title. But yeah, this can all change at the drop of a hat. Where did that drop of a hat saying come from, by the way? But please, let me know your thoughts on the fight. Leave your comments in the comments. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.